Welcome to paradise. Welcome to paradise. Welcome to paradise.
Thanks for humoring my artistic urges here. So we are going to talk about the week 4 assignments and give you a few little tips to help make them easier for you. So we'll start with the soil jar test. So the first thing to think about with the soil jar test is how important the test location actually is. Because your site very well may have a great diversity of soils, okay? And so I want you to really put some thought into where you're going to test from. Now, we often have the situation where we have people up in Canada or Minnesota or in Europe taking this class during the winter time when you actually can't even get to the soil, you can't get a shovel into the soil. And so we totally understand this. This is something that comes up again and again. And in that case, just getting some soil, even from a potted plant, just to get through this exercise is important, and it'll just have to be good enough, because if the soil is frozen and covered in snow and ice and you can't get soil, then that's just how it is, and we understand that situation. But the test locations are important because many sites, first off, just have a diversity of soil types, right? You may have a place where you have alluvial soil that's been deposited. You have a creek or a waterway running through. You may have higher ground. You may have soils that are more clayey, more sandy, even on the same site. But also, on urban sites, the soils may have been greatly altered. A lot of times they will cut and fill to create a pad for a house, even bring in outside soil. And so the soils that you find on an urban site are really they're not uniform. Oftentimes, urban sites are greatly altered. So they may have brought in material in an urban site. So you may find yourself really feeling like you need to take soil samples from multiple sites. So if it seems like you have a real diversity of soil types on your site, then we do want you to test for multiple sites. So ultimately, you're going to end up with this blob somewhere on the soil triangle here that's going to give you this general idea of the makeup of your soils. And that's ultimately where we're getting to. And you're going to have an easier time determining where you are on this clay, silt, and sand chart if you mark off the percentages on your soil jar test. So ultimately, the goal of this first part of the assignment for this week is to really give you a general understanding and feel for the composition of your soils in relation to the clay, silt, and sand particles. So next, I'm going to move over to here. We have your compost resources assignment. Now, the main points I want to make with this assignment, especially if you're in an urban area, you've got this thing called the urban waste stream. And in the urban waste stream, there's a great abundance of material, compostable material, moving all around you. So I ask you to think creatively, think outside the box, really look around at businesses, restaurants, neighbors, construction sites. Where are the materials that could actually be useful to you on your site, right? So we're asking you to stretch out a little bit in your thinking here. The other thing I want you to remember is Marisha gave this compost lecture where she really talked about greens and browns. So we want you to make sure on this assignment that you really consider the both materials in both of those categories, the greens and the browns. Okay. The last assignment we're going to talk about is the soil mapping assignment. Now, we ask you to use the Natural Resources Conservation Services website for the United States. Now, for a lot of people from the United States, that's just fine, right? However, we always have a number of students, an increasing number of students that are outside the United States. So first off, if you're in the United States, you need to realize that the NRCS has coverage gaps. Not all areas are covered by the NRCS soil tests. And so if you come across that situation that your site is actually not covered on the soil maps, then we want you to just find the most regionally specific resource that you can find that describes your soils. So it may be that you can only find a very vague and general description of the soil types of your area if you're not on this map. And frankly, that's just the best you can do then. The same thing is if you're outside the US. Canada, we found with Canada that each region of Canada seems to have their own soil mapping resources that are not equal to each other as well. So if you're outside the US, we just ask again that you find the most regionally specific resource. Now, once you do find a description of your soil type, the question you're asking yourself is, did your soil test, your soil jar test, match the description of the soils from whatever resource you found? Because frankly, sometimes it doesn't, right? I've seen this happen many times, that a soil description and the actual soils on site did not match up. So that's something that you want to be informed of. And this goes back to your testing location for your soil, and it also goes back to possibly the need to test multiple sites in your soil test. There's a couple, I'll get down here. There's a couple really interesting things when you do print out an NRCS soils report to look at that are very fascinating. One of those is the soil profile. They give you a listing of the material and the depth in each strata and the depth to bedrock. So this depth to bedrock, basically how deep can you dig before you hit some solid material, solid rock. So this is something that's really a very valuable thing to know about your site, that these NRCS reports do tell you that you're not actually going to find from your jar test, that may or may not be accurate, of course. Another thing that is very interesting to find on your soil tests, on your soil reports, is the infiltration rate. And this tells you how long it takes for water to soak into your soil, to infiltrate into your soil. So these are both really interesting facts. Once again, the NRCS maps, and in fact, any regional soil maps you find are only so specific. They haven't gone and tested soils and really figured out the boundaries between soil types on a micro level. A lot of it is done through extrapolation. And so you do have to take these reports with a little bit of a grain of salt, because they may or may not be accurate for your site. So that's why we back it up with the jar test as well. But you will only know if it's accurate, say, on depth of bedrock by actually digging a hole and seeing if you hit bedrock where those reports say you will. But they're not valueless by any means, and I personally use them as guidance when I'm going to visit, assess, and design a site for a client. So you'll have to make your own judgment about how accurate the material is from those soil tests. So this was a little hint here for week 4, and we look forward to seeing what you come up with, and thank you very much.